Hello friends, the Black Diamond Infinity was released today and it's the second offering in 6Zero's edgeless paddle line. 6Zero has been on a tear lately with new paddle releases. After launching their iconic Double Black Diamond at the end of 2022, there were no new paddles released for the better part of a year, and suddenly at the end of 2023, the Infinity Double Black Diamond was released in November, the Ruby in December, and now the Black Diamond Infinity in January. So let's take a look at the newest paddle in the 6Zero lineup, break down all the performance metrics like spin, hand speed, control, power, and pop. And at the end of the video, we'll see how everything comes together in terms of gameplay and which type of player this paddle fits best. The Black Diamond Infinity costs $220, and you can take 10% off that with the code 10JohnQ. The Infinity has the same shape as the original Double Black Diamond, a hybrid shape with a curved top and a slight flare going from the bottom to the top of the paddle face. The dimensions fall between a standard square paddle and an elongated paddle, which is why it's classified as a hybrid. Something about this particular shape seems to be special in terms of the balance it gives for swing weight, sweet spot, power, and pop. Not just the overall length and width, but that flare adds some balance perks and boosts the twist weight, adding stability during off-center shots and broadening the sweet spot. The dimensions are the same as the original Black Diamond series, so 16.3 inches long, 7.7 inches wide, and 16 millimeters thick. One thing to note is that the first run of these paddles has a slightly thicker handle with a 4.5-inch circumference. Later runs will have a thinner handle with a 4.25-inch circumference. I actually prefer the thicker handle, but if you like thinner handles, you probably want to wait a month or so until the second run. The static weight of the paddle they sent me comes in at 7.97 ounces, so just under 8 ounces, and the swing weight is 106, falling at the 18th percentile in my paddle database. So this is a very low swing weight that helps with hand speed and maneuverability. At this swing weight, the Black Diamond Infinity will feel the same as the Selkirk Power Air Invicta, Electrum Model E Stealth, and the ProKennex Black Ace. And that's a smaller swing weight than even its companion, the Double Black Diamond Infinity. More on that later. Another thing that helps with this paddle's hand speed and maneuverability is its balance point, which is the center of mass as measured from the bottom of the handle. So literally the point where the paddle balances on your finger. The Black Diamond Infinity's balance point is 23 centimeters or 9 inches. This location falls at only the 15th percentile in my database, which means that this paddle feels comparatively head light, which helps with maneuverability because the balance point is closer to your hand. The Black Diamond Infinity's twist weight is 5.7, falling at the 16th percentile. The twist weight correlates with the width of the sweet spot from side to side on the paddle, but it's important to note that the twist weight can't just be directly translated into the size of the sweet spot. And this paddle is one of the best examples that I've tested where the sweet spot feels much larger than what the twist weight would indicate. I thought I would want lead tape on this paddle right away given its twist weight measurement, but I was actually reluctant to add it because it plays so well stock. Now, there is some twisting of the paddle with off-center shots, which is shored up with just a little bit of lead tape, and I'll discuss more details on that a little later in the video. But this is an interesting concept that I don't think we have a consensus on yet. So this whole idea of sweet spot and paddle stability, or the ability of the paddle to withstand twisting in your hands during off-center shots. I think a lot of us reviewers, including myself, have considered these to be one and the same. So if a paddle twists in your hands when you hit it off center, then it has a smaller sweet spot. But I think it might be useful actually to consider these to be related but separate. So narrowing the definition of the sweet spot to the area on the paddle where you get good ball responsiveness. For example, during the exact same swing on a dink, the sweet spot would be the area on the paddle where the ball makes it over the net versus the areas outside of the sweet spot where the ball dies and goes into the net. And I think we've all experienced an instance where we hit the ball off center and you get that unpleasant twisting, but the ball still does what you want it to. And that's very different from when you hit the ball and it just dies. Anyway, this is turning into a digression, but the reason I think it could be useful to make this distinction is that as paddle companies are getting better at fine-tuning their equipment to optimize several sort of competing performance metrics, like hand speed and maneuverability on the one hand versus paddle stability and sweet spot on the other, then it'll be useful to have a more nuanced discussion about these performance metrics. And now that I'm thinking about it, we could also break down paddle stability into lateral stability, or the ability for the paddle to withstand twisting during off-center shots, versus long axis stability, which would probably be called medial stability, which we commonly refer to as plow-through. What do you think? Too much detail? Does it even make sense? Let me know your opinions in the comments below. All right, let's move on. And I better be careful or else I'm going to end up as Bread and Butter's biggest paddle nerd in 2024. Although this is an edgeless paddle with the same shape as the original Diamond series, a lot more went into this paddle than simply removing the edge guard. The production of the Infinity paddles is a lot more labor intensive, requiring a lot more manual labor and craftsmanship. And they had to create new molds for the thermoforming process because to get the same dimensions without an edge guard, the paddle face needs to be expanded slightly to compensate for the thickness of the plastic edge guard. The Infinity series is thermoformed, so heat and pressure are applied at different stages to cure and seal everything together, including the facing layers, the core, edge foam, and the carbon perimeter seam. This process is also more complicated than what was used on the original Diamond series and involves multiple new orientations of the unidirectional pre-preg facing materials to dial in the paddle's power and control. So the only difference between this and the double black diamond Infinity is the surface materials that are used. Compared to the double black diamond Infinity, which uses raw carbon fiber, the black diamond Infinity uses raw fiberglass. This involves the use of 3 unidirectional pre-preg sheets of fiberglass fibers sourced from the premium supplier Toray, oriented at different angles, and then a texture is applied on top of these fiberglass layers using a peel ply sheet infused with epoxy. So what kind of performance can we expect with raw fiberglass versus raw carbon fiber? Fiberglass is actually more supple than carbon fiber, so it flexes more. As a result, you get more energy return when hitting the ball as the fibers flex and then rebound. So you get more pop and power with a fiberglass surface compared to carbon fiber. It's important to note here that the fiberglass used by 6-0 in their Infinity series and their original Black Diamond is very different from the fiberglass paddles that have been around forever. Like I already mentioned, they're using the same layup as they do with raw carbon fiber, so 3 sheets of unidirectional fiber oriented at different angles, and on top of that, they're putting a raw texture with a peel ply. Also, the texture they put on the fiberglass surface is very rough and creates top-tier spin. Here's a view of the peel ply embossing under a microscope, which is very similar to the original Black Diamond. It's a coarser texture than the double Black Diamond Infinity, and it gets better spin. My spin results for the Black Diamond Infinity averaged 2273 RPM, placing it in the top-tier spin category. So you can expect great top spin, slice, and the ability to really shape the ball. Another thing to note here is that early in 2023, my primary paddle was the original Black Diamond for about 4 months. One of the things I noticed about that paddle was that the texture did not wear down as quickly as other raw textures. After 4 months of continuous play, its texture still looked pretty good under a microscope, and its spin potential had only minimally decreased. I don't know if there's something about the raw fiberglass that's more durable than raw carbon fiber, or if it was just a one-off with that particular paddle, but it'll be interesting to see how the texture on these Black Diamond Infinity paddles holds up compared to my original Black Diamond. For this section, I'll compare the Black Diamond Infinity to the other paddles in the Diamond lineup, so the double Black Diamond Infinity and the original Diamond paddles. I'll also draw comparisons to many of the other popular paddles out there if you're not familiar with the 6-0 lineup. And if you want to compare the performance metrics yourself to over 100 other paddles, I have a searchable and sortable database up at johnqpickleball.com. I'd classify the Black Diamond Infinity as an all-court paddle that does most things well and excels in the domain of hand speed. Its low swing weight and low balance point make it very maneuverable, so it's good for people looking to up their kitchen game during quick hand exchanges. The swing weight of the Black Diamond Infinity is slightly lower than the double Black Diamond Infinity and significantly lower than the original Diamond Series paddles. To give you an idea of how the Black Diamond Infinity compares to all the other paddles out there, its swing weight and balance point fall at the 18th and 15th percentiles in my paddle database, making it one of the most maneuverable paddles out there. The lightweight feel and exceptional maneuverability were the first things I noticed when playing with this paddle. My primary paddle is the 6-0 Ruby, which has a sort of middle-of-the-road average swing weight and balance point, so nothing too heavy or too light. But the Black Diamond Infinity felt much lighter in the hands, and I felt myself getting the paddle into position quicker during hand exchanges at the kitchen. This was most noticeable when I was caught off guard with an attack and I had to move my paddle across the center plane of my body, so from backhand to forehand, or vice versa. Spin is top tier, falling at the 93rd percentile on my database. Compared to the other paddles in the Diamond lineup, it takes the cake for spin, edging out the original Black Diamond, and its spin is significantly better than both of the double Black Diamond options. This paddle does collect more ball dust than most other paddles, and you can see where each and every ball hits the paddle. I was also able to swing more freely using anything with topspin, so serves, drives, lobs, and even dinks, knowing that this paddle puts more shape on the ball. Slices were also more effective, creating shorter bounces that often caught people off guard. The extra spin also helped a lot during the control game, making the ball feel more responsive off the face of the paddle and putting more shape on the ball so it dips at your opponent's feet. To measure power, I recorded serve speed with a radar gun and took an average. My average serve speed for the Black Diamond Infinity ranks near the median in my paddle database at the 52nd percentile. For pop, I take the average speed of punch volleys, and this puts the paddle at the 79th percentile in my database. So what these measurements mean in terms of gameplay, in terms of power for strokes with a full swing like serves, drives, and overhead slams, this paddle is near the middle of the pack. And for pop, or strokes with shorter swing paths like punch volleys, flicks, counterattacks, and any sort of speed up at the kitchen, this paddle puts more velocity on the ball than most other paddles. Compared to the other paddles in 6-0's Diamond Series, the Black Diamond Infinity is less powerful than the original Black Diamond, but more powerful than the double Black Diamond Infinity. It's actually very comparable to the power of the original double Black Diamond. So during gameplay, I didn't feel like it had extraordinary power, like for example, the Gearbox Pro Power, but it wasn't necessarily lacking in power either, especially when compared to other lightweight paddles, which generally don't perform very well in the realm of power. I felt like I got enough power on serves and drives and other shots with full swings, but again, it was nothing overwhelming. One of the advantages of having less power is that fewer balls fly out of bounds, especially when combined with the exceptional spin that puts more dip on the ball. But of course, the trade-off here is that you get fewer clean winners with less power. In terms of pop, the Black Diamond Infinity outperforms all the other paddles in the Diamond Series, even the original Black Diamond. This is probably the result of a combination of things like the more springy, raw fiberglass surface and the low swing weight and balance point of the paddle, which allows you to more quickly speed up the paddle during your swing path. During gameplay, I found this paddle's good pop to work very well with its low swing weight and balance point, making it a very effective weapon during battles at the kitchen. Counters were especially effective because you could get your paddle into position more quickly given its maneuverability, and its good pop made attacks and counters more lethal. The trade-off with high pop is the tendency to pop up more balls, which in general makes poppier paddles more difficult to control. But one of the things I noticed with the Black Diamond Infinity is that the paddle face feels less stiff than most thermoformed paddles, particularly the original Diamond Series paddles. This is probably the result, at least partially, of differing orientations of the unidirectional fiberglass surface layers. So on the original Diamond Series, they oriented the facing layers at 90 degrees to each other, making a very stiff paddle face. But on these Infinity paddles, they're probably orienting the surface layers closer to about 45 degrees from each other, which makes a more forgiving, softer paddle face. And this makes the paddle response feel less rigid, and to me, this softer feel goes a long way to help with control. Yes, this paddle is less control-oriented than the double Black Diamond Infinity, but I didn't have a hard time controlling it. As I mentioned before, the sweet spot did feel good to me, especially considering the paddle's twist weight. I was able to take this paddle to the courts completely stock without adding any lead tape, and the sweet spot felt fine. I was expecting to slap on some lead tape right after the first game, but I found myself reluctant to add any weight because the hand speed was outstanding with the stock paddle. And I know that 6-0 put a lot of R&D into this paddle, which included perimeter weighting. I got a prototype of the Infinity series months ago, and since that time they adjusted the perimeter weighting and the production models play much better. Eventually I did add a small amount of lead tape to the paddle to see how it affected its performance. So I added 3 grams to each side of the paddle at the 4 o'clock and the 8 o'clock positions, which is less than 1/4 of an ounce total. This increased the swing weight by 7 points from 106 to 113, and the twist weight was increased by nearly an entire point from 5.7 to 6.6. The lead tape did make a noticeable difference to the lateral stability of the paddle, so the twisting of the paddle from side to side during off-center shots. And it did broaden the sweet spot a little, but honestly, I'd say that the benefits of this particular lead tape configuration did not outweigh the costs. A 7-point jump in swing weight is very noticeable in terms of hand speed, and I don't feel like the boost to stability and sweet spot was large enough to warrant the loss of hand speed. There's also a small boost in power with lead tape, but at the same time, a small decrease in pop, so there's always going to be some trade-offs. I do think that adding lead tape a little lower, closer to the bends of the neck, would provide better results, but I didn't have time to try out that configuration. The Black Diamond Infinity is an excellent choice for people who want a well-balanced paddle that does most things well, but excels in the domain of hand speed. I do think that most people who play at the 4.5 level and below will prefer playing with this paddle in its stock form. Like I mentioned before, it plays well above its twist weight, meaning the sweet spot feels larger than the twist weight measurement would indicate. There is some lateral instability in its stock form, or twisting during off-center shots, but that's always going to be a trade-off with lightweight paddles. Granted, at least half of what we think of as hand speed comes from anticipating where the ball is going to go. That's why the pros can get away with playing with much heavier paddles and still have ridiculous hands. But that kind of anticipation comes from years and years of experience, and for the rest of us with less experience, there's a real benefit to playing with paddles with less swing weight and better maneuverability. That way, if you're sitting at the kitchen playing the odds, backhand ready for anything that comes at your body or on your left side, but then someone speeds up on your right wing without you expecting it, you have a much better chance of getting your paddle into position to return that ball with a lightweight paddle. And by lightweight, I mean a low swing weight and a low balance point. And the Black Diamond Infinity excels in this realm. In terms of all the other performance metrics, this paddle is very well balanced and, in my opinion, is best classified as an all-court paddle. Its spin is at the upper end of the top tier range, and I've never heard anybody complain about a paddle having too much spin. And its power is mid-range, which is actually very good for lightweight paddles, which usually struggle with power. And its pop is well above average, which gives this paddle some offensive options at the kitchen. Even though high pop usually comes at the expense of good control, that was not entirely the case with this paddle because the pop is not generated from a stiff, crispy face like what you see on the Pro Kinetics Black Ace, but instead it comes from a low swing weight and balance point, which allows you to accelerate the paddle very quickly and whip through the ball to get the velocity. There's also some added pop from the fiberglass facing material's springiness, which makes this paddle slightly harder to control than the double Black Diamond Infinity. But the paddle face actually feels softer than every other 6-0 paddle I've played with the exception of the Ruby. To me, it plays softer than the double Black Diamond Infinity, which itself is softer than the other Diamond Series paddles. Using a durometer, the Black Diamond Infinity's surface does measure slightly softer than the double Black Diamond Infinity. The Shore D measurement for the Black Diamond Infinity is 92.7 versus 94.7 for the double Black Diamond Infinity. All of this is to say that the control is there for the Black Diamond Infinity. If I had to rate all of the Diamond series for control, I'd give first place to the double Black Diamond Infinity. Second place is a tie between the Ruby and the Black Diamond Infinity. Third place goes to the original double Black Diamond. And fourth place is the original Black Diamond. So in a head-to-head comparison of the two Infinity paddles, the Black Diamond Infinity has slightly less overall control than the double Black Diamond Infinity, but more offensive weapons at the kitchen in terms of speed-ups, attacks, and counterattacks. Last but not least, the Black Diamond Infinity is a really good-looking paddle. It has clean lines, cool graphics, and subdued color accents. It does turn heads without being too flashy. Although in its stock form, it's a really good-looking paddle, you for sure need edge tape to protect against chips, cracks, and scratches. So again, the Infinity doesn't have an edge guard and the edge can be very easily damaged. 6-0 makes a branded edge tape that matches the paddle very well while also protecting the edge. An alternative is Pickleball Effect edge tape, which does an equally good job at protection, but it's unbranded and comes in more color options. You can take $22 off the price of the Black Diamond Infinity at checkout using the code 10JohnQ. That brings the price down to just under $200, which I think is fair for such a premium paddle that involves so much manual labor in its manufacture. As always, thank you for watching, and your likes and comments always help out this channel. And if you want to see my top-ranked paddles in 6 different categories, check out my 2-part series here and here.